What was your I knew it moment? Write in the comments what you think about it. What was your I knew it moment? Enjoy the show. Story 1. Had a friend who owned a house and rented out a room in it. The room was currently open and one ex-tenant came crying about how he had nowhere to go and just needed to get on his feet. I warned my friend not to fall for that line and that the guy would just loaf around his house and never actually get back on his feet. I was dismissed as being cynical and that he needed to help his friend. 6 months later, the guy was still there, still unemployed, and apparently did nothing but smoke weed and watch YouTube on his phone. Friend finally kicked him out and said he wished he'd listened to me. I'm sure he moved on to his next target with the same I have nowhere to go sob story. Story 2. Growing up in the 1980s, it made no sense when old people insisted that the more money you gave to the rich, the more money everyone would have. They always insisted I just didn't understand finances when I asked questions. But even then, you could see most of that money was just going into their bank accounts, not being redistributed into the economy. Story 3. When I was rear-ended by a dude coming off of the freeway, I knew he was wasted as soon as I saw him, pizza sauce on his face and everything. He said he was a volunteer fireman and that he would never drive intoxicated. After SP did an evaluation, he most definitely was. He was also from Canada, so it's a felony to drive intoxicated. Fuck that guy. Story 4. When Elizabeth II died. There was news about her being hospitalized, and people were speculating whether she was dead or not. A lot of people said that the media Reddit was just being alarmist, and that being hospitalized did not mean anything serious. I assigned a higher than 90% chance she was dead because they called the family to come over while they did not on previous hospitalizations. Story 5. I knew one of my cousins was evil. I told him about another cousin of ours being abusive to his partner. The secretly evil cousin said, "Yeah, that doesn't bother me. I'll still hang out with him." Since that day, I haven't spent time with him or gone to any events he's been at, and been telling the whole family for years he's a piece of shit. Well, surprise, surprise, secretly evil cousin is now abusive his wife, kids, and his parents. For years, I said he was awful, and only now the family believes me. Bonus story, my other awful cousin has now joined a cult. Story 6. I have a couple that come to mind. Back in 2017, I think, I went to the hospital's emergency services with someone who fell kinda bad from their bike. We spent the whole fucking day there, and when we got out, I thought, this country's medical system is one epidemic away from collapsing. Then came COVID, and, well, lots of people died before they could get the care they needed. Then during the first months of the pandemic, I was saying to everyone who would listen that people are going to want this to be over and back to normal. So bad, they will ignore the consequences, the failed responsibilities of those in charge, and even the things we'll have learned about COVID. And if we collectively let that happen, we will live in even more degraded societies without being able to acknowledge it. And oh boy. Story 7. I've had many where I've suspected the local police, social workers, employees, and a certain halfway house manager working for Esperi Care Hermani in the city of Kokkola, Finland, of lying to me. And I found I was right sometimes months or even years afterwards. I just hate corruption, but sometimes these people are just petty, and then have it out for you when you point out what they are doing is wrong. Story 8. I called the pandemic going down the way it did earlier than most. The WHO data was pretty clear that asymptomatic transmission was massive, and that the virus had pretty much spread everywhere by early January. I also had second-hand information from Wuhan that it was much worse than was made public, and that the novel nature of it meant nobody knew what the hell was going on, or how to prevent spreading it. Assumptions being, it wasn't primarily airborne at first. My boss called me alarmist and wouldn't let me present my predictions, costing a lot of money to companies we advised. He got fired when it came to light he buried my research. Story 9. Cousin had a friend group for years, and from the moment they met, I never trusted this one friend in particular. 4. 5 years later, they're planning a birthday party for said friend, and they planned on bringing a dog to scare my cousin, who was attacked by one as a young kid, and one whistle blows and tells my cousin everything, and how they had secretly disliked her for years. I don't think I've ever been so angry in my life for another person. Story 10. I worked for my local sheriff's office. I was a corrections officer and had an issue with a senior officer when I was rookie. Supervisors got involved because we absolutely could not work together. I told the supervisor that he has an integrity problem and that they needed to watch him. I was told not to talk about senior officers that way and reminded of his career and contributions. I quit because it was a relatively toxic environment, and a year later that senior officer was in the newspaper. He was fired for being involved in a drug ring with inmates. Story 11. Back in my town growing up, A family Chinese people got brutally murdered in their house one evening in a neighborhood near a somewhat busy street. Super clean, nobody really knew that it happened until the kids stopped showing up to school. I forget the exact details, but at my school, when everyone was talking about it, I said that I thought it was a Chinese mob hit and it had to be drug-related. It was too precise to be anything other than business. People disagreed and started calling me racist and whatnot, until a few weeks later it came out that it actually was most likely a mob hit. Story 12. A co-worker at my fast food job really hated our patties. Every single day they'd complain about them and refuse to eat any during lunch shifts. One day I walked in on them in the patty vault. They were shoveling patties down their gullet when they thought nobody was looking. They loved them, but had been too ashamed to admit it. The next day, it all went to their thighs, and then they exploded behind the register. Story 13. I cooked sous vide ribeyes for a double date with friends, but one of them didn't say much about it and didn't even finish it. The day after our date, they post themselves grilling steaks, saying that those are the best they've ever had. I knew they didn't like mine, but sheesh, at least wait a week. It took me longer to prepare things than them to passive-aggressively roast me online. Story 14. I go to a vacation with my friends, me M, my friend M, and another friend F, which she was there when we arrived. They knew each other, but there was nothing between them. Then one day they asked me to speak alone and do not disturb them. I was like, okay. After that, the day goes by, we go to sleep, and when I woke up, they left me and go to breakfast. I was thinking WTF is going on. It was obvious they started to line each other, but they denied it very furiously, which I found very weird. You can admit it, and it would be okay. Months later, they admit they are dating. I knew it. Note, male friend cheat on female friend, and it was diabolical. That's what you get for going to breakfast without me. Story 15. Not me, but a girl I know. She thought her husband was having an affair, so she decided to set a trap for him. This was pre-internet days, so she placed a notice in the local newspaper personal column, posing as a lonely woman hoping to escape with someone who liked a bunch of things her husband liked. Things like drinking pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, obviously hoping her husband would see it and reply. Lo and behold, someone responded asking to meet at a local bar we used to hang out at called O'Malley's the next day. She showed up, and yep, you guessed it, there was her husband hoping to meet his new bit on the side. I just wish I could have been there to see his face when she walked in. Story 16, that he was the one after a disastrous first date. He picked me up, and we went to a local walking park. After returning to his car, it wouldn't start. We both had to walk home, and just as I said, well, at least it's not raining, the heavens opened. I was soaked through by the time I got home. I got back home not expecting to hear from him again, but he rang me when he got home and started the conversation with, "I bet you've never been that wet on a first date before." We both laughed it off and been stuck with each other since. Story 17. Ex-wife was showing all the hallmarks of cheating, but denied it repeatedly. After a few weeks of suspicion, I progressively had people tell me what she was doing, people who either knew her or one of her affair partners. She only finally came clean on the cheating. And even then it hasn't been physical, despite multiple people telling me 100% was, she and the person just thought they were being discreet. Eventually she left when she got an STD, but didn't tell me, but thankfully left before passing it to me, and would no longer be able to hide it. Story 18. When I woke up and read the news regarding the Brussels airport bombing in 2016, I just knew my father had to have almost got caught up in it. My father has been awful close to being a victim of several terrorist attacks, was supposed to be at the WTC on 9/11s, was in London during the subway bombings, was sitting 2 blocks away during the truck rampage in Stockholm. So when I read the news, I called him. Turns out he was on an inbound flight about to land, and they got redirected to Amsterdam. And before anyone asks, yes, I'm sure he's not secretly some terrorist mastermind. Story 19. On 9/11s, when the second plane hit the World Trade Center, I said Osama bin Laden was behind it. I remembered that he was behind the bombing of the parking deck in the bottom of the Trade Center, so it seemed logical that he was behind the plane's crashing. Everyone in the office just stared at me when I said it, as I don't think they knew who bin Laden was. I must admit I was a little surprised when I turned out to be right. Story 20. My ex. Now we were together at first. She would always hand me her phone, randomly trusted me. I knew her code, everything. Then suddenly she changed. The code would hide it from me, started getting lots of messages which used to never happen, and she would text back real quick, excited like, and turned the phone to where I wouldn't see. Again, she was not like that first 6 months together. One day got the text phone in my hands helping beat a level on best feigns it shows in text. Your ass looked good in those pants today, baby. Boom. I fucking knew it. Bitch, it's over by E. She tried denying it with the proof right there. WTF. Story 21. X had cheated. I just had a gut feeling the night he did it. He drove for Uber, so when he was driving and I could call him, he would cancel the call and he would call me back when the rider was not in the car. This night, the call kept ringing out to voicemail. He was messaging back after the phone went to voicemail, which, why would he do that if he was driving with someone in the car? I smelt bullshit. He also started a fight earlier that day. People don't ever really deviate from normal behavior without any real reason. People are their patterns. We broke up a little after that. I had been done for a while because he turned into an asshole. I asked him for months what happened that night, and he took a long time to finally tell me he met someone out that night and went home with her. Slept with her unprotected and then came home. All I needed to never speak to him again. Story 22. Joined the Navy a month after the 1993 WTC bombing. Spent the next 9 years telling everyone they'd be back. Saw the footage of the Twin Towers coming down and was heartbroken no one cared to listen. Still feel I didn't try hard enough to get us to act sooner. What's sad is I feel this overwhelming dread right now that we will be hit again, maybe just before or after the next election. Something tells me it'll be worse. Story 23. When I was a kid, my friend's neighbor was working on his car door window, and I don't remember what he was doing at the moment exactly, but I said, "I'm going to laugh if your window falls through your car door," and wouldn't you know it? Not a minute later, the window falls through the car door, stuck between the ground and inside the car door. I still don't know how it happened, but I knew it was about to happen. He said I jinxed him. Story 24. Suffered from chronic lower back pain for years. Went to the doctor who flippantly told me to fix my posture. Went to a chiro who told me to come in weekly for adjustment. Gave up for a while. Went to another doctor who took an x-ray and told me there wasn't anything wrong with me. One day I went to the doctor for a hernia who had me take an MRI. Was told the MRI would be like 20 minutes. Ended up being 45. Doctor sits me down and says, "Yeah, that's a hernia all right. But did you know that you have degenerative disc disease? The discs in your lower spine are some of the worst I've ever seen." Blew my mind that it took like 15 years of chronic lower back pain to get diagnosed for something that went on a doctor's wall of fame. Story 25. When this couple joined our friend group, I immediately had a weird feeling about them, but I was told I was being silly and judgmental. The guy was overly cocky and his wife was super shy and barely talked. Out of nowhere, they left the group. A year later, our group found out they were swingers and were looking for other couples to match up with. They had asked another couple in the group to hang out and thought nothing of it. When it was time to hang out, they found out what hangout really meant. Story 26. I worked at a diner in my hometown after university. It was awful and horribly run. They made a huge deal about our biggest competitor being Tim Hortons. Okay, bud. I found a new job and quit, and told everyone else to do the same because they were not going to survive. 4 months later, it was converted into a Tim Hortons. Everyone lost their jobs. It was bittersweet. Story 27. Mine is milder than a lot on here, but when I put on some shapewear and it made my insides feel funny. I had had a tubal 4 years before, and my husband and I had only had sex once in the previous few months. Depression on my part. So he and my sister kept telling me there was no way, especially since it had only been about 3 weeks since our one-off. Next morning, I puked and took the damn test. My surprise caboose is 7 now, and I finally got one that looks like me, LOL. Story 28. I was working at my local airport as a dishwasher a couple of years ago, and after getting some feedback from my manager, I went to inform him to update my phone number from my home phone number to my cell instead. When I walked out to the dining room, I noticed her was playing with the hair of one of the waitresses. Keep in mind, he was married with a daughter at the time when all this happened. I was thinking at first, was he having an affair with the waitress? He eventually then left the company weeks later completely unannounced. Fast forward a few years, I am working as an MP at my base, which was on the opposite side of the runways from the airport. I do a usual nightly walk-through of the base bar, and like usual, I get talking with the bartenders to kill some time. Come to my surprise, one of the bartenders was one of the managers when I was working at the airport restaurant. She told me that he had not quit as he was busted for having an affair with this waitress and was fired for it. It only gets more interesting as there are third individual in this matter. The third individual was another waitress whom had been mutual friends with the two. The first waitress was still living with her parents at the time. She was 20/21-ish, while the manager, being married, needed somewhere to hide it all. The second waitress would go out of town every weekend or so and lend her one-bedroom apartment to them and their misdeeds. You can probably piece it from there. TLDR. I was certain the married manager and waitress were having an affair. Manager left the job. Another manager told me later down the road with all the other details. Story 29. Much less scandalous than some of these other ones, but for me, it's definitely Blue Bunny's Bunny Track ice cream. Anyway, Kemp's Moose Tracks is my one true love now. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like it. Be sure to write comments and share your stories.